You're listening to an IOE podcast.
Powered by UCL Minds.
This is Research for the Real World. Conversations with researchers about the paths they've taken to shape our everyday lives.
This is Research for the Real World. Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Blaxland, a lecturer in education in the Department of Education, Practice and Society at IOE, UCL's Faculty of Education and Society. In this season of Research for the Real World, we're talking about the theme of language, culture and the arts in education and the impact research can have on everyday lives. Today, I'm delighted to have Professor John Potter and Annie Davey in the studio. John Potter is Professor of Media in Education at the IOE, based in the UCL Knowledge Lab. He's particularly interested in the co-production of research with children and young people and uses a variety of participatory research methods. That's active participation, observation, text, image, audio. And at one point, he was a primary school teacher and trained at the IOE back in the day. Annie Davey is a lecturer in arts, culture and education at the IOE's Department of Culture, Communication and Media. Alongside her academic career, Annie has also worked extensively as an artist educator in museums and galleries, including Tate Modern, the Serpentine Gallery, the British Museum and the Hayward Gallery, devising and leading talks, workshops and longer-term projects, often with a focus on the institution as a site for critical interrogation, intervention and play. Great. I am very excited to hear all about this work and to expand upon this, both of you. So welcome, John. Welcome, Annie. I think it's welcome back for you, actually, John.
Yes, it is. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, it's good to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks.
Great to see you. And from those wonderful introductions, there's obviously loads we can talk about. But just to begin with, John, I know you've done this before, so maybe I'll start with you, Annie. We always begin with an icebreaker. So could you perhaps tell us a bit about your career journey and what's led to this focus of yours, this intersection of art, culture, education?
Sure. So I came to the IOE about 9-10 years ago. And prior to that, I studied fine art at BA level and MA level, initially in the late 90s in Manchester. I did an MA about 10 years later. And really across that time, I've kind of juggled working as an artist educator in museums and galleries, often developing work with audiences sort of that have grown out of my practice, but also working as a further education teacher and lecturer. So I've run foundation courses, fine art programs, I've taught GCSEs and A-levels. So really it wasn't until I came to the IOE that all these quite disparate feeling and somewhat messy career kind of came together and made a lot of sense, because I started working on a program that's very much about working with people across these areas. So primary school teachers, higher education lecturers, artist educators, secondary teachers. And the course very much facilitates those sort of crossovers and conversations between those areas.
Looking forward to exploring that more. And I must say, I'm sure studying fine art in late 1990s Manchester must have been great fun.
Yeah, definitely.
John, how about you in terms of your, well, particularly perhaps your time as a teacher and how that influenced your current work?
I mean, I think hugely, because as you mentioned, about 100 years ago, I trained in the feels like that. I'm actually sitting where the primary department used to be and recording a podcast, which, was a technology that we could just about dream of in those far off days. But yeah, no, I started my career as a primary school teacher and I mostly worked in East London. And I immediately loved the kind of diversity of London in terms of ethnicity, race, class, everything. In the class in front of me on the Isle of Dogs, there were 27, 30 children who came from so many different backgrounds. There are about 27 different languages in the school. So it was a really rich cultural experience. And even in those days, I was interested in trying to bring more media into the school. I used to do lots of music making, actually, with very primitive MIDI programs and songwriting and all of that kind of stuff very early on. And it was almost always based on what the children brought with them. So I think in the DNA of what I do now is my experience as a primary school teacher. The curriculum was structured very differently in those days. And it was Ofsted was just around the corner. There were different kinds of structures in the school day. It was a different experience back in the day, but that's definitely in the DNA of what I do now, for sure.
Wonderful. And in terms of what you both do, it's obviously all very relevant, but it's particularly contemporary now, I guess, or relevant because we've had at time of recording some quite interesting interventions by, well, Lisa Nandy, who's the new Secretary of State for Culture, but also I noticed that Lord Bragg, Melvyn Bragg of South Bank Show fame, has made an intervention in the House of Lords. Both of them talking about equal access to arts and art education and provision of arts in schools. And in light of all of this, what do you both think about how the media, arts, play, even why are they so fundamental to education and society as a whole? I know that's a huge question, but it gets to the heart, I think, of what we're here to talk about.
I think that we're emerging from a period where it's been downplayed. So a change in government gives us an opportunity to think again about what it means to be at school, what it means to be a learner, and to connect to perhaps to culture and to media cultures, and not to pretend that these things are just not happening, and to de-emphasize perhaps some of the knowledge-based curriculum that's been in the ascendancy in recent years, and to think about how children and young people engage with processes, the processes of making things, of exploring things, of asking what if questions, of extending their skills and disposition towards knowledge building. So it's like taking a step back from that. And it's if you watch how a young child learns about their world and how they acquire, without learning, they acquire language. So language acquisition is different from language learning. And the arts allow an engagement with that kind of process and exploration across all of those domains that you've mentioned: media, arts, and play, which is coincidentally the title of the research centre that I run, Researching Media, Arts, and Play. So I think it's that asking that what if and developing dispositions towards learning which are open and which challenge and stretch people further. But I suppose there's just particular things that arts do.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, art education covers or includes play and media as well. So this sort of area is capable of developing forms of sort of knowledge that cross different disciplines. For example, in schools, media, arts, and play enable ways of engaging with the world and expressing ideas and developing knowledge that crosses the school, and the possibility as well for developing affective kind of responses, memorable encounters. This is certainly something I see as being a value in arts practice and practice-based research that I think we'll talk about a bit later on.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess just a very big question, and I see what you're saying about the recent past, our recent history, where it seems to have been this notion that science and technology and engineering and maths are very important, and arts almost are a nice optional extra if they can almost be afforded or whatever. But there are obviously people who will say that without the arts and without wider cultural things, we are nothing. And I guess it sounds very grand, but you're not even. That is human expression fundamentally, isn't it? So these are really big themes we're dealing with here.
They are, and I think I much prefer the STEAM acronym anyway. The science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. But also, I'd add another M for now, which is media. So I think that every one of those people that's engaged with being a brilliant scientist or a technologist at some stage played, and at some stage they had an experience which enabled them to ask what if and to build whatever they're making in terms of technology and science. It's all about curiosity. And in a primary school setting, these things are intimately connected. And it's only later that they get separated out into subjects, often for quite pragmatic and very good reasons, to develop, deeper knowledge in those areas. But to keep a kind of arts experience going, I think is a really important aspect of the curriculum, whether it's examined or not. But music also, it's absolutely central to my life. Annie's already mentioned it. We're both very, very interested in music as consumers and even as producers of music. It's something that to me is fundamental. So yes, science, yes, technology, yes, engineering. But at some point, all of those people who do all of those things so well will have played and will have engaged with the arts.
And there's just a lot of overlap in general, isn't there, in terms of thought processes? I mean, I remember reading just the extent to which how mathematicians were often very good musicians because there's actually a huge overlap in terms of skills and the way that the brain works. So separating them out has always been, to me anyway, it's always seemed silly.
Yes, I would tend to agree with that. And systems where they put them together are quite interesting. There's a new program in secondary education in Northern Ireland that connects computing up with creative arts, for example. that's run off the back of the experience of the large media corporations that are in Northern Ireland making TV series and so on. But that in itself indicates of its importance even to the economy. Even if we go further up into the future, those are the people that are going to be making things that are important to the economy as well.
I think if we think about, say, contemporary arts practice as well, very often, artists will be using sort of history as material or sociological approaches, economics. All of these areas are so central to many people's practices that, engaging with sort of contemporary practice within schools as well seems sort of really important part of this opening up and helping to legitimise the subject area to enable teachers to have the space to develop approaches.
Yeah, I mean, it was tried there are various schools that tried this in recent years and were very, very successful. So, for example, Parkside School, where Professor Andrew Byrne used to work, and James Durran, who's an advisor in education in North Yorkshire, he was a leading teacher there with whom we worked at the BFI, more of which later. But they worked at Parkside Media Arts School, which was one of a handful of schools across the country that were teaching the whole curriculum through media arts practice. So they would make films about historical events, they would capture drama experiences on video, they would work with the whole curriculum through the media arts, and were extremely successful in terms of, if you want to use the traditional measures of exam results, they were good at that too. Yeah, I think that it's a value all round, and I'm a big fan of it, big supporter of it.
You mentioned your research centre a minute ago, John, which I believe is the Researching Media Arts and Play Centre, so REMAP. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it arose out of we were previously known as Digital Arts Research in Education when Andrew Byrne was directing it. And then we've moved into this area of researching media arts and play. And it incorporates people who work at the UCL Knowledge Lab, who do work on media, culture, and society. And it's expanded out beyond that across the Department of Culture, Communication, and Media to people like Annie and people like Evangelos in music, so that we have a much broader base. And we've gone further out from IOE into UCL CASA. So we work with people from immersive environments now as well. And our interest is in arts projects that enable us to work in this way and enable us to do some of the things that we were talking about just now. And the projects that REMAP works with have already been started, some of them by the people involved, and we bring them under that umbrella. And the activities of the centre are sharing ideas on practice, sharing ideas on method. We have regular seminars, and we distribute it through a blog that we've created as well on the Research Centre. And we're all advising each other and open to give advice on how to gain, what kinds of funding might be available and so on. And we're also, just to point out, we're very, very interested in the connection with our teaching as well. All of us bring our research into our teaching, and our teaching, some of us back into our research. Bruno de Paula is doing a lot of work in this area. He's one of the people that works at the Knowledge Lab. So we're keen on those research and teaching links as well.
Do you want to say anything more about particular projects? I mean, I've got the Play Observatory and Playing the Archive written down here. They sound great.
Those two are part of a run of 3 projects that were connected to the OPI archive, and we've collaborated with Sheffield University School of Education on a run of 3 of them. And Andrew Byrne and at IOE and Jackie Marsh in Sheffield were instrumental in sort of setting this up. And the middle one of them I became involved with through fieldwork that I did with Kate Cowan, that we've spoken about before, in a primary school in East London. And there were parallel projects going on in Sheffield as well, where we were working with the OPI archive, which, for your listeners who don't know, it was a very large archive of children's games and play practices, which were collected not by researchers so much as people who are virtually kind of anthropologists, really, Peter and Iona Opie. And they worked by, first of all, placing an advert and getting children to write in from classes about the clapping games that they play and the skipping games and all of these rhymes that they used, and their imaginative play as well. And they collected them, and Iona Opie went into playgrounds with a tape recorder and recorded audio as well. So our projects were partly preserving and archiving and digitizing these artifacts, and partly with playing the archive in interesting children in the past of play and in getting them to reflect on their contemporary play practices. So we would give them voice recorders and iPads and GoPro cameras. And a very, very strong theme in my work and in the work of other people in the centre is child-centred or child-focused research, where we try to hear the child's voice. So we recruited researchers who were 10 years old from year 5, a group of 12 of them in this school, and we talked to them about qualitative research methods, which they took on very quickly, very rapidly. And we'd go into the playground with a carrier bag full of voice recorders, and they would go off in all directions and record their peers playing. And we did it in that way. And we have a hunch that we got more than if we had stood over them and recorded it. When the pandemic hit and lockdown hit, that's when I led a project called the Play Observatory, which we have spoken about before on this podcast. But that was mainly trying to think, what are children playing now at home when they don't have access to open spaces and to amenity? And how are their connections with each other preserved and their connections with their play practices? And that was an online data collection activity, which was set up in collaboration with University of Sheffield and collected 400-500 pieces of film, video, audio, text illustration of actual play practices during the pandemic. And we think that the spin-off from that is we've got lessons to learn about how children had time to develop their inquiry into arts practices and media making and so on that perhaps they don't get usually. So there are lessons and ongoing impact from the Play Observatory, which we're still feeling today, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, well, both of you actually, when we do come on to you in a second, Annie, but how you hope or you'd like some of this research and this work to funnel into the wider policy making process. But I guess you're hinting at it at the end there in terms of the future and what you'd like to see.
Yeah, I mean, in the pandemic, in the lockdown, in some of the homes that we were able to reach, there was definitely a sense in which they needed something to do, which wasn't just consuming media, but was also making media. So we saw lots of examples where people tried to make, and did make stop frame animation. They made little video clips of them playing in the local streets, playing at home. We ran an online video workshop, an optional extra for people who had already submitted material. If they wanted to go further with media, they could. So they had extended periods of time in which there seemed to be a real value to that. And we know as well that there was encouragement from the high level as well to play online multiplayer games, whereas previously there's a sort of attitude towards screens that they're totally bad and awful for children, and it's just not a thing to do. So in lockdown, one of the ways in which they maintained some social contact was to do building in Minecraft and Roblox and so on. There was then seen to be a value to these kinds of play practices. So we like to think that there could be an impact in informing people about media practices and how maybe it could even change the curriculum in some way.
Annie, then, your work focuses on engaging young people through creative projects in galleries and institutions. And how does this approach help in the wider issue of amplifying younger people's voices?
So I suppose I work at the moment through or via or with teachers who themselves are working with young people. I mean, also work with higher education lecturers, early years educators across different phases. So I see the teaching work that I'm doing as being primarily about facilitating teacher sort of voice and agency and space and time to think and to develop kind of a critical reflection upon practice within context so as to open up possibilities for teaching and learning in schools or whatever context they're working in to amplify young people's voices and their kind of creative visions. But also through my research, so I've got a few different projects on the go, but one is part of the Remap group, and it's called Ways of Machine Seeing. Ways of Machine Seeing is a sort of collaborative project with a centre actually at London South Bank University called the Centre for the Study of the Networked Image. And what we're doing there is we're thinking about the ways in which machine learning and AI are very much shifting and shaping in the ways that we see and understand images. And the work really builds on a TV program and a book that came out in 1972 by someone called John Berger that was called Ways of Seeing. And John Berger, way back then, was thinking critically and facilitating people to ask questions of the images that we see in galleries and in advertising and through the media. So we're building on that work to think about what do those questions mean for now, and arguing that art and design teachers have a big stake within thinking this question of how we see images and how we're understanding images and how we're even making images in a moment in time that's been just profoundly affected by digital technologies and AI. So the work has been a collaboration with the Photographers Gallery, and this year we're going to work with Tate Modern through their Electric Dreams exhibition. And we're working with PGCE students. So PGCE students have this very sort of unique experience of being not quite in a job in a school yet. They're embedded in a university context, which is there to really promote the development of a kind of teaching philosophy. So with the PGCE students, we're doing a number of workshops to start to develop some teaching activities that are produced by and for teachers, and that open up ways of engaging both creatively but also critically with using AI. So the work brings together young people in schools, PGCE trainee teachers and their mentors in schools. And this, hopefully, we've got funding this year from Responsible AI. So this should be leading towards working with NSCAD, which is the National Society for Education in Art and Design, which in itself will hopefully lead to the beginnings of working with thinking about policy and curriculum change. So we're starting with this very kind of on the ground way of working with teachers in schools, taking on board their kind of anxieties and enthusiasms, but with the aim that this is really important to think about across the curriculum, but particularly in art and design education, how we might be thinking about working differently.
The more the both of you talk, the more I realise this is pretty big stuff, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Annie's work is brilliant, and I think that the potential for impact is huge, because it just, you have to work from the ground up, don't you? And you have to engage people with their experiences of these really strange processes of AI and how that is changing the way that we're seeing the world, how it's changing the way we're seeing images, and then take it through how the teachers themselves are going to work with it in the future. And that has potential for massive impact, I think.
Yeah, and I think this sort of work is sometimes quite slow. It's not as fast as we want it to be, because it really requires building trust and understanding different people's positions and understanding the position of teachers in schools. So the idea of sort of co-creation with teachers is something that I'm very enthusiastic about, but also a little bit skeptical about its overuse sometimes, because I think to really co-create with people, you need to kind of work with an awareness of the conditions in which they're working, and in a way that's sort of mutually learning from each other.
Sure. I mean, the working with the schools element leads us on to a big topic, which is collaboration. And to collaborate with other groups is something that obviously most academics try and aim for, and some more successfully than others. But I'm looking at the list of some of the organisations that you both collaborate with, and it's pretty impressive and substantial. You know, arts and cultural organisations. Yeah, would you like to tell us a bit about these, and maybe perhaps point out if there's any specific examples where these collaborations have actually had a direct impact on policy or practice, or indeed on your research and work?
I could start. I mean, we've had a long association with the British Film Institute, and a long association through the MA Media, as it was now MA Digital Media programs, with the British Film Institute. And I think that that's involved both teaching and research. So colleagues of mine, Michelle Cannon, for example, has researched a filmmaking program called the Cinéma de Cent Ans de Jeunesse, 100 Years Young, say it in English, which is a collaboration with the Cinémathèque Française in Paris. So that's BFI and Paris connection. So we've been quite international about this. And it's where children get given ideas for prompts for films to create in a particular kind of film language. For example, incorporating the reel, or incorporating cutaways, or incorporating time-based elements in their work. They get given a brief, and then they work across the UK on this. And then they go to Paris, exhibit it, take questions on it, defend it. And all of this has been researched by Michelle, and I did some work on it as well. So that's an example of British Film Institute, and we still have a memorandum of agreement with them, with the IUE, and that's been going on for more than 20 years. The V&A, we've been involved with the what was formerly the Museum of Childhood. We took part in the Festival of Play, and lots of our work from Play in the Archive was in there. And that was also exhibited in the Wellcome Institute, actually, in their Festival of Play on Euston Road. When the Museum of Childhood closed and started to become the Young V&A, as it is now, it reopened last summer as the Young V&A, during the period of its closure, we provided an online exhibition with curators from the V&A from the pandemic play research from the Play Observatory. So there's a really large and very beautiful website called playinthepandemic.playobservatory.com, which is still open and still receives many hits. And that was almost in a way the first Young V&A exhibition, because we compared, through the work with the curator, we compared things that children had submitted during the pandemic as a crisis with work and play that children had made during other times of crisis from the V&A collection, and they're side by side online, and you can view them across a range of themes. It's really, really interesting. And the collaboration with the V&A has continued because I'm now on the committee of the Board of Trustees at Young V&A. So yeah, that's been really, really rewarding work, and it's super interesting. And we have in mind working with them again on knowledge exchange projects and in quite large bids as well. We want to maintain that partnership. So we have a very good working relationship with the Young V&A. And with V&A East opening, we hope to develop that further through our BA Media program at UCL East. And I know Annie is keen to engage with V&A East as that comes on stream next year. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I've just been thinking there about how actually something in that trajectory of my career working across institutions has probably really informed my approach to trying to forge links with institutions now in and through the teaching as well as the research. So back when I was working in FE college, we often did a sort of external project with an English heritage house nearby that just seemed logical to me because I also worked doing workshops in another English heritage house. So this year on the MA Art Education, Culture and Practice that I run, we're working with the Whitechapel Gallery, and the aim is part of a module called Alternative Models for Art Education. The aim of the project is really kind of to get students to experience a kind of live, quite professional experience of developing a kind of workshop or a response to one of the exhibitions, and to get feedback from staff at the Whitechapel Gallery. So it's kind of providing people who maybe normally work in a school or a university to just go through the sort of process of what it would be to develop a teaching activity outside of that context, which is really, really valuable because, as we all know, once we get into jobs, we often remain within the institution, but there's so much that can open up as soon as people have the opportunity to step across phases of education.
Just going back to that comment that we came across near the beginning of the podcast from Lisa Nandy and from Melvin Bragg as well about the need to reinvigorate arts education and the mood music coming out of the new government about the fact that they are going to get behind that, but also as a tool almost of soft power and thinking about Britain's reputation abroad. What do you both see the role of researchers like yourself, but also academic institutions like this one that we're in today in facilitating all of that?
I think it's helpful that our research underlines the potential impact of media, arts and play in education, in the things that we do, because the people who develop those dispositions towards finding things out, developing new ideas and responding to the environment and perhaps becoming active or even activist in what they do and say, they're the people that will fuel the future developments. And it's been crazy that there hasn't been much investment in media arts, and it's even gone down, not necessarily in all nations of the UK, because it's one of the few things that is actually made and sold worldwide in this country. If you think about just cinema and film production, we're still just about hanging on as a world leader in that, but special effects and all of the creative arts, they need to re-emerge from this period where they've not had the same status. And there is a window of opportunity with Lisa Nandy saying this, for people to step into that area and say, yeah, let's boost it in our education system. Very helpful intervention from Lord Bragg as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of change of discourse, and I suppose there's something about the ways in which discourses can affect practices in the world, ways of thinking and ways of understanding. And it seems that an important thing has been the sort of the re-legitimization of the arts and media and play that actually gives license to take the risks that have always been necessary in order to produce sort of culture,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that have sometimes been supported more than others. So I think it's,
Mm.
with a sort of hesitation, but it's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
optimistic moment for us to kind of really work with that change of
Yeah,
discourse in the public realm.
I
Yeah.
think so. And we have to work on the impact side of what we do as well in order to help that to happen. Yeah, for sure.
As you're both going through your research, I mean, we all know what this feels like. You're doing what you have to do, and it's all part of the job. But you come across stuff all the time, and you think, "Oh, that would be quite interesting," or "I'd love to go off and, as a side project, do something else." As you're working through all of this, are there things you're thinking, "Oh, yeah, in the future, I'd either like to move on to this, or maybe incorporate other things into the kind of work and research you're doing now?"
Well, I'm sure Annie feels the same way, but this probably happens to me about 10 times a day. Yeah, and thinking about collaborations, actually, sometimes working with other universities is beneficial to this as well, to help you start a network, to help you start a way of thinking about things. So either it arises out of a project, so out of the play projects, we're part of a Scandinavian network in looking at children's culture and how children's culture is produced. But through working on Playing the Archive and other projects, one on virtual reality storytelling, I've got to know Dylan Yamada Rice very well. He's a really, really interesting and creative professor of arts and immersive storytelling at the University of Plymouth. So she and I, and Eleanor Dare, who used to work at UCL, now at Cambridge, Angus Main from RCA, these networks are forming around children's voice and how they feel about the digital and about AI. So, an ongoing and future looking project is funded by the Digital Good Fund out of Sheffield, different bit of Sheffield University. And we've been working with children expressing themselves through hybrid arts practices on how they feel about AI, how they feel about the digital in their lives. And we've been getting them to make things and do 3D scanning and all sorts of ways of unlocking their emotion and affective response to the digital world. And we think there's something in this because these voices are not usually valued and not usually recorded. And we're always looking at potential future funding for these kinds of bits of work.
Yeah, and for me, I would say similarly, many ideas and not enough time. But one area that is myself and colleagues have done a lot of talking and thinking and teaching about, my colleague Claire Robbins has done some research into, but it's thinking about the relationship between the school and higher education within art and design education. Most of my research is actually around higher education and art schools and fine art education. And there's a kind of quite a mismatch between the expectations we have of in relation to schools. But then another side project that's kind of grown out of my research into higher education has been something quite different, but has been the sort of development of a script writing practice and a sitcom, a collaborative sitcom, which is an attempt to produce a kind of way of thinking critically about fine art education in the university through the medium of comedy as a kind of pedagogical approach. So we're in the early stages of this, but I would love to spend a lot more time on that.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. I've seen it, the early stages of it. It's really brilliant. So, yeah.
It strikes me, again, just as you're both talking, that this is the kind of topic that it's endless and it's boundless, isn't it? You could just move into more and more potential areas and do more work. I mean, do you have to sometimes both say, right, we've just got to stop here and draw a line under certain things? And are you able to do that and quite effective? I know it's something that some academics struggle with, being able to just stop and draw these boundaries around what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's important to have certain principles that guide you, and I think our principles. We're working on a manifesto for Remap that began on an away day that we held at UCL East, and we have used some very, very interesting provocations in manifesto building that come from Tilburg University, from Simone Ashby, and we had a really good fun day sort of thinking about a manifesto. And I think the thing that would help you to bound it or to help you to think this is remap work or this is good practice is to kind of coalesce around some principles around what you believe in and whether you believe in hearing the voices of children and young people, the importance of recognizing that there is a culture outside of formal education which could be useful, that there are, that children's identity is important to them and should be represented in the curriculum. If you have these as kinds of principles and that you should link research to teaching and teaching to research, that helps you to stay, a little bit grounded when you're firing on all cylinders at these ideas. And then you think, well, yeah, I mean, something like the sitcom has enormous potential, I think.
Impact.
Impact. It has potential impact. Of course it does. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm very much still learning how to really establish those boundaries. But yeah, I'm always asking
Yeah,
questions,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's definitely a work in progress.
yeah.
Well, John, Annie, the time's flown. It's been really interesting. It's been great to get to know you and know all about your research. I mean, I particularly liked I know about the OPES archive. It's great to see how that's almost being developed, or those concepts are being developed, but also just really interesting the extent to which you both clearly collaborate with such wide groups of people. I'm a historian, so I sometimes feel a bit siloed and a bit stuck in the archive just on my own. I'd love to be interacting with more people like you are. But thank you for coming on the podcast today. It's been great.
Well, thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
You've just heard from Professor John Potter and Annie Davey. Some of what we've been covering today is also available in the episode notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, we have an archive of 23 past seasons. Search IOE Podcast to find episodes of Research for the Real World, as well as more podcasts from IOE. And a quick favour before you go. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd really appreciate it if you could give the IOE podcast a rating. 5 stars would be nice if you're feeling generous and enjoying the show. And that would help us to reach more people who are interested in hearing about such important work. I'm Sam. Thank you for listening.
Research for the Real World is produced by IOE Marketing and Communications and IOE Research Development. The theme music was created by Rob Cochran. Tatiana Sotero Diaz is the series advisor, Amy Leibowitz is the series producer, and Jason Ilagan is the executive producer of the IOE podcast.
Thanks so much for downloading and listening to this IOE podcast.